Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. As you settle in, perhaps beneath the quiet glow of a bedside lamp or in the soft darkness of your room, let's take a slow journey together. This is a time for calm reflection, for gentle curiosity, and for drifting thoughts. The world outside may still be busy, but here we can let that noise fall away. Our topic this evening is a curious one. For as long as human beings have been watching the sky, the moon has carried a strange reputation. Its pale face has been worshipped as a goddess, marked as a guide for calendars, and celebrated in festivals. But just as often, it has been feared. There's an old belief that the moon has the power to disturb the mind, that its light can stir up restlessness, confusion, even madness. The connection is so old that it lingers even in our language. The word lunacy comes from luna, the Latin word for moon. To be a lunatic, people once thought, was to be touched by moonlight, to be pulled into a state of disorder by the phases of the night sky. Even now, the idea has not entirely vanished. Ask someone about a full moon, and they might tell you that people act strangely when it rises. Emergency rooms expect to be busier, police officers swap stories of unusual nights, and teachers half joke about restless classrooms. But is there really something about the moon that unsettles the human mind? Or is this simply a reflection of our own tendency to see patterns in the mysterious and the unknown? In this journey, we'll move slowly through history and myth, through science and poetry. We'll explore the old lunacy laws of England, which once treated crimes differently depending on whether they were committed under a full moon. We'll walk through the forests of folklore, where witches gathered and wolves howled at silvery skies. We'll pause in temples where lunar goddesses were worshipped, and wander through old hospitals where doctors puzzled over patients said to be moonstruck. From there, we'll drift into the science of circadian rhythms, tides, and sleep. We'll consider what researchers have discovered and what they haven't, about whether the moon truly changes how we behave. Along the way, we'll stop to listen to poets, artists, and dreamers who have long been inspired and sometimes unsettled by its glow. The aim is not to find a final answer, but to enjoy the mystery itself, to let the question carry us into different corners of human imagination until the edges blur between fact and story, between what is measured and what is simply felt. So as you close your eyes and let your thoughts wander, imagine the moon above you, a quiet, ancient witness to our lives, cycling endlessly through shadow and light. And together, we'll ask, why have we so often linked the moon to madness? When we look for the roots of this strange connection between the moon and the mind, one of the clearest places to begin is with a single word. Words often hold quiet histories inside them, and this one is no exception. The word is lunatic. It comes from the Latin luna, meaning moon. The Romans believed that certain forms of mental disturbance were influenced by the phases of the night sky. To them, madness was not constant, but cyclical. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, so too, they thought, did clarity and confusion within a person. Someone might seem stable on one night, but restless and out of control on another, all because of where the moon happened to be. This idea lingered long after Rome itself had faded. In medieval Europe, medical texts still described a category of disorder called lunacy. It was believed that seizures, hallucinations, and bouts of instability might strike more often under a full moon. Physicians and priests alike described the mind as vulnerable to moonlight, as if it were a subtle tide that could rise and fall inside the skull. Even the legal system absorbed this belief. For centuries, English courts used the term lunatic in official documents. A person judged to be a lunatic was thought to be suffering from an illness caused or influenced by the moon. It shaped not only medicine, but law, society, and daily life. The image is easy to picture. Imagine a world without electricity, where the night was deep and dark. On most evenings, there was little light beyond a flickering candle or a dim lantern. But when the full moon rose, the entire landscape was transformed. Shadows lengthened. The outlines of houses, trees, and faces glowed in eerie silver. Dogs barked into the night. People stirred restlessly in their sleep. And all of it felt uncanny. Under such conditions, it made sense to see the moon as a force of influence. Its light pierced the darkness in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. To call someone a lunatic was not only to say they were ill, it was to suggest that their mind had been touched by that strange silver radiance, pulled out of balance by something beyond human control. Even today, the echo of that belief remains. We sometimes use the word moonstruck to describe someone behaving in odd or erratic ways. Though modern medicine has long set aside the idea of lunar illness, the language reminds us of how deeply this association once ran. The word lunatic is more than an insult or a curiosity. It is a fossil, pressed into the layers of our speech. And like all fossils, it carries with it the memory of an older world view. A world in which the boundaries between body and sky, mind and moonlight, were blurred. And so, as we continue our journey, we'll see how this linguistic seed grew into laws, into superstitions, and into myths that still ripple through our imagination today. The word is only the beginning. From here, the story of lunar madness begins to widen, like the first sliver of moon climbing into a dark sky. When we look for the roots of this strange connection between the moon and the mind, one of the clearest places to begin is with a single word. Words often hold quiet histories inside them, and this one is no exception. The word is lunatic. It comes from the Latin luna, meaning moon. The Romans believed that certain forms of mental disturbance were influenced by the phases of the night sky. To them, madness was not constant, but cyclical. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, so too, they thought, did clarity and confusion within a person. Someone might seem stable on one night, but restless and out of control on another, all because of where the moon happened to be. This idea lingered long after Rome itself had faded. In medieval Europe, medical texts still described a category of disorder called lunacy. It was believed that seizures, hallucinations, and bouts of instability might strike more often under a full moon. Physicians and priests alike described the mind as vulnerable to moonlight, as if it were a subtle tide that could rise and fall inside the skull. Even the legal system absorbed this belief. For centuries, English courts used the term lunatic in official documents. A person judged to be a lunatic was thought to be suffering from an illness caused or influenced by the moon. It shaped not only medicine, but law, society, and daily life. The image is easy to picture. Imagine a world without electricity, where the night was deep and dark. On most evenings, there was little light beyond a flickering candle or a dim lantern, but when the full moon rose, the entire landscape was transformed. Shadows lengthened. The outlines of houses, trees, and faces glowed in eerie silver. Dogs barked into the night. People stirred restlessly in their sleep, and all of it felt uncanny. Under such conditions, it made sense to see the moon as a force of influence. Its light pierced the darkness in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. To call someone a lunatic was not only to say they were ill, it was to suggest that their mind had been touched by that strange silver radiance, pulled out of balance by something beyond human control. Even today, the echo of that belief remains. We sometimes use the word moonstruck to describe someone behaving in odd or erratic ways. Though modern medicine has long set aside the idea of lunar illness, the language reminds us of how deeply this association once ran. The word lunatic is more than an insult or a curiosity. It is a fossil, pressed into the layers of our speech. And like all fossils, it carries with it the memory of an older world view. A world in which the boundaries between body and sky, mind and moonlight were blurred. And so, as we continue our journey, we'll see how this linguistic seed grew into laws, into superstitions, and into myths that still ripple through our imagination today. The word is only the beginning. From here, the story of lunar madness begins to widen, like the first sliver of moon climbing into a dark sky. Language can plant the seed of an idea, but laws reveal just how seriously a society takes that idea. For centuries in England, the belief that the moon could disturb the mind was written not only into poetry and superstition, but into the legal code itself. These were known as the lunacy laws. In the 18th and 19th centuries, English courts sometimes made legal distinctions between those who were thought to be permanently insane and those who were believed to be lunatics. The difference was subtle but important. A person considered insane was thought to suffer constantly, without relief, but a lunatic was thought to experience cycles, moments of clarity followed by episodes of disorder, often explained as being influenced by the phases of the moon. This distinction shaped how people were treated in the justice system. Property rights, guardianship, even responsibility for crimes could hinge on whether a person was labeled as insane or as a lunatic. A lunatic might be judged less responsible for their actions if those actions were believed to have been committed under the sway of a full moon. Madness was not seen as a fixed state, but as something that could ebb and flow like tides. One of the most curious traces of this belief is found in records of asylum management. In the 19th century, when England was building large institutions for the mentally ill, some keepers noted that they expected more disturbances on nights when the moon was full. More shouting, more restlessness, more attempts at escape. Whether these were coincidences or self-fulfilling expectations, the connection was assumed to be real. The moon's influence was written into reports, into practices, and into budgets. It's strange to imagine the legal world guided by lunar phases. We tend to think of law as solid, rational, a matter of evidence and precedent. But here, we see how cultural imagination can slip into the very structures of governance. Judges, lawmakers, and doctors all seem to agree. The moon was not only a distant body in the sky, but an active player in human affairs. Consider for a moment how unsettling that must have felt. If madness could arrive not from inside a person, but from the heavens above, then no one was entirely safe. Anyone might be swept into instability at the wrong time of the month. The full moon was not only a spectacle in the night sky, it was a potential trigger of crime, violence, or despair. And so, the law adjusted to account for it, weaving cosmic cycles into earthly rules. We might be tempted to smile at this now, to see it as a superstition dressed up in legal language. But in some ways, the lunacy laws capture a truth about how humans have always lived. We are not purely rational creatures. We are storytellers, and the stories we tell about the world often become the frameworks that guide our actions. If we believe the moon is powerful, then we act as if it is. And if we act as if it is, then its influence becomes real in practice. As the 19th century wore on, Advances in psychiatry and medicine began to erode the old categories. The lunacy laws slowly gave way to more clinical language about mental illness. But the very fact that such laws existed at all shows how deep the lunar association ran. It was not confined to folklore, not limited to whispers around the fire. It was carved into the official record, into the rules by which society governed itself. So when we look back at the lunacy laws, we are not only reading about old statutes, we are glimpsing a world in which the moon was never just a moon. It was a force, a presence, a quiet companion that might shape the fate of an individual, or even decide how justice was carried out. And from here, the trail of belief leads us into stranger territory still, into stories of witches, spells, and shapeshifters who gathered beneath the glow of the full moon, practicing arts that were thought to harness the very madness we've just described. If the courts of England once recorded the moon's influence in the language of law, the villages and countrysides of Europe carried a different record, one written in whispers, stories, and fear. For many people, the full moon was not just a phase of light, but a sign that certain kinds of power had entered the night. It was the hour of witches. In folklore, witches were said to draw strength from the moon's glow. The image is a familiar one, a coven gathering in a clearing, the pale disk hanging overhead, its light spilling down like a silver spotlight. In those hours, charms were spoken, potions brewed, and spells cast. The moon was more than a backdrop. It was the source, the fuel, the great lamp of sorcery. Why the moon? Perhaps because it is changeable. Unlike the sun, which rises each day in reliable brilliance, the moon is elusive. Sometimes it is absent, sometimes thin, sometimes a perfect circle that seems too large for the sky. It waxes and wanes, a cycle of concealment and revelation. That quality made it seem mysterious, unstable, and perfect for magic. In parts of Europe, it was believed that witches could not perform their rites without lunar light. The moon was thought to awaken hidden forces, to open a door between the ordinary and the uncanny. Even herbs picked beneath a full moon were said to carry special potency. The timing of spells mattered. Certain nights, marked by lunar phases, were thought to be especially dangerous. This connection between moonlight and witchcraft was not confined to Europe. In many cultures, moon deities were linked to fertility, intuition, and hidden knowledge, qualities that, when misunderstood, could easily be painted as dangerous. In India, Chandra, the moon god, was associated with both soothing beauty and unpredictable moods. In Greece, the goddess Hecate, often depicted holding torches at crossroads, was tied to the moon and to sorcery. The moon was always there, a mirror in the sky, reflecting not only light but imagination. The fear of witches, of course, was also a fear of the unknown. To live in a world lit only by firelight was to live with long stretches of darkness. The sudden brilliance of a full moon could feel almost unnatural, painting the world in sharp contrast. Animals stirred, shadows moved, and the night seemed alive. To explain that strangeness, people told stories. They pictured witches gathering, shaping the chaos into intention. This gave the moon a double face. On one side, it was romantic, a companion to lovers, a muse to poets. On the other, it was unsettling, a lantern for the uncanny. Its light revealed too much. It made the familiar world strange again. And when people acted oddly beneath that light, restless, sleepless, agitated, it was easy to say they had been caught in the spell of the moon. Witch trials in Europe often included testimony about nocturnal gatherings timed with lunar cycles. Accusations described rituals held beneath the full moon, dances around fires, and pacts signed in shadow. To us, these may read as inventions, projections of fear onto neighbors and outsiders, but they also show how the image of moonlit magic was burned deeply into the collective mind. The moon was not passive, it was active. It gave power, and it stirred unease. There is something haunting in the thought that a simple glow in the sky could inspire such fear. But perhaps it was never just the glow. Perhaps it was the way the moon transformed the night itself, making it both visible and untrustworthy. In that shifting light, the imagination could run wild, filling in gaps with stories of witches and spells. And so, as we drift through this long history of lunar madness, we move from the courtrooms of England to the firelit clearings of folklore. From laws to legends, from words written in ink to tales carried in voices. In both, the moon's light was seen as more than a reflection. It was a force, a kind of power that might bless or curse, inspire or unbalance. And from here, the stories turn darker still, toward one of the most enduring symbols of moonlit transformation. The werewolf, a creature whose madness was thought to arrive only when the full moon shone bright. Of all the legends tied to the moon, perhaps none is more famous than the werewolf. It is a story of transformation, of humanity slipping its skin and becoming something wild and uncontrollable. And at the center of that story is the full moon. The werewolf myth exists in many forms. In some traditions, it is a curse, passed down through a bite or an inherited affliction. In others, it is a spell, a deliberate shape-shifting into an animal form. But across cultures and centuries, the same pattern appears. The transformation is linked to the moon. When the full moon rises, the ordinary man becomes something other. Why the moon? Part of the reason may lie in the way its light changes the night. The full moon turns darkness into something uncanny. Shadows grow longer, details sharpen, and the familiar landscape feels alive with new possibility. Under that glow, the imagination can easily picture hidden instincts rising to the surface. The werewolf is the embodiment of that fear, the idea that the moon could awaken the beast within. Medieval Europe embraced this legend with particular intensity. Stories spread of men who prowled villages under the full moon, attacking livestock or even neighbors. In some trials, confessions were extracted, often under duress, from accused werewolves who admitted that their transformations were triggered by moonlight. Whether these were true beliefs, hallucinations, or desperate inventions, the theme was consistent: the moon as catalyst. The werewolf also symbolized something broader. It reflected the fear that beneath our civilized surface lies a wilder, more dangerous self. The moon, with its shifting phases and eerie glow, became a kind of mirror for this inner instability. It was as if the moon reminded people that human beings are not fixed creatures, but capable of sudden, frightening change. Other cultures carried their own versions of lunar shapeshifting. In South American folklore, the lobisomum was a cursed figure tied to the full moon. In Asia, stories of tiger men or fox spirits also surfaced, many of them connected to nocturnal transformations under bright skies. Again and again, the pattern repeats. The moonlight awakens something hidden, turning the familiar into the monstrous. The werewolf is not only about fear, though. It also tells us something about desire. There is a strange allure in the idea of giving in to raw instinct, of shedding the rules and roles of daily life. To become a creature of the night is frightening, but also strangely liberating. The moon, in this sense, is a permission slip, a cosmic signal that it is time to let go, to lose oneself. Madness and freedom are tangled together. In modern culture, the werewolf remains a powerful image. Films and books often play with the moment of transformation, the helplessness of resisting the pull of the moon. Sometimes it is depicted as horror, sometimes as tragedy, sometimes even as romance. But the link to lunar light never disappears. It is the moon that calls the beast forth. There is something deeply human about this story. It is a dramatization of what many people have felt on restless nights. A sense of being pulled out of ordinary rhythms, of becoming someone slightly different under the gaze of the moon. The werewolf legend simply pushes that feeling to its extreme. So the myth persists century after century, reminding us of the deep suspicion people have held about moonlight. It is not neutral, not merely beautiful. It is active, stirring, transformative. In the werewolf, we see the ultimate fear of losing control, of the mind and body slipping into something we can no longer recognize. And as these tales of shapeshifters spread, they merged with other beliefs about the moon's power, not only to change men into beasts, but to send the sleeping into strange journeys, wandering the night with no memory of what they had done. Stories of sleepwalkers soon became entangled with lunar madness as well. Not all tales of lunar influence involve violence or monstrous change. Some are quieter, though no less unsettling. Among the oldest of these is the belief that moonlight could draw people out of their beds and send them wandering into the night. This is the story of sleepwalking, an act that seemed, to earlier generations, like another form of madness born under the moon. Imagine a village centuries ago, with no electric light. The houses are dark except for the faint glow of a hearth fire. Then, on the night of a full moon, a door creaks open. Someone steps out, barefoot, eyes half closed, moving slowly down the lane. They walk without speaking, without seeming aware, their face bathed in silver. Neighbors who glimpsed them might whisper that they were moonstruck. It was thought that the moon had loosened the mind, pulling the sleeper out into the open. The link between sleepwalking and the moon runs deep. In medieval texts, physicians warned that sleeping under direct moonlight could cause not only restlessness, but physical harm. Some claimed the rays of the moon had a cold, moist quality that disturbed the balance of the body's humors. Others believed the moonlight could literally enter the body, unsettling the mind and drawing people into nocturnal wanderings. Even in folklore, the image of a moonstruck person was common. Sleepwalkers were seen as vulnerable, suspended between worlds, not fully asleep, not fully awake. To walk under the full moon was to risk being claimed by forces outside oneself. There were warnings not to wake a sleepwalker, as it might shock the soul and cause permanent harm. Better to gently guide them back to bed and hope that with the waning of the moon, their mind would quiet again. In Shakespeare's plays, we find this imagery carried forward. Perhaps the most famous example is Lady Macbeth, who wanders in her sleep, tormented by guilt. Though the play does not name the moon as the cause, audiences steeped in old beliefs would have felt the echo. Night, madness, and moonlight were already intertwined in cultural imagination. To see a figure walking in trance beneath the moon was to see the human mind laid bare in its most fragile state. What makes the connection particularly haunting is that sleepwalking remains mysterious even today. Modern medicine describes it as a disorder of arousal, when the brain is caught between stages of sleep. A person may move, speak, or even perform complex tasks, all without conscious awareness. While researchers note no strong evidence that the moon itself causes these episodes, The timing of sleepwalking, at night, in silence, often under moonlit skies, makes the association hard to shake. It is easy to see how our ancestors, living in darker worlds, might have made the link. A child wanders out of the house during a full moon. A farmer's wife is found sleep-talking in the courtyard on a bright night. These events, strange and inexplicable, begged for explanation. And so the moon became the culprit, its beams seen as threads tugging at the mind. In this way, the image of the sleepwalker and the werewolf are not so far apart. Both represent the loss of control, the slipping of the self into another state. One is violent and beastly, the other quiet and ghost-like. But both are tied to the same luminous presence above. Both are reminders of how easily humans can drift away from ordinary awareness when bathed in silver light. And so the moon came to symbolize not only transformation, but in-betweenness, those states where the boundaries blur. Between human and beast, between waking and dreaming, between sanity and madness. The sleepwalker, stepping silently through the night, became another figure in the long shadow of lunar influence. As stories of these nocturnal wanderings spread, they joined a growing body of literature and art that treated the moon not merely as a natural object, but as a character in human affairs, a character that inspired both awe and unease. Writers and poets, especially in the Renaissance and beyond, drew heavily on this theme, giving us some of the most memorable portrayals of lunar madness in the arts. ChatGPT said, "Here we go, Section 6. Madness in literature in full Slumber Quest style, approximately 700 words." Section 6. Madness in literature. The moon has long been a muse for poets and playwrights, painters and composers, and within the arts, its link to madness has been one of the richest and most enduring themes. To read through the great works of literature is to find the moon hovering in the background, not just as a symbol of beauty, but as a shadow of instability. In Shakespeare's plays, the connection is especially clear. In Othello, characters speak of the moon making men mad. In King Lear, there are warnings of the moon's men, wanderers who lose their wits under its influence. And in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the moon is a central presence, governing both romance and confusion. Shakespeare's audiences would have understood the reference immediately. To speak of lunacy was to speak of the moon and of the peculiar behaviors it seemed to awaken. Beyond Shakespeare, the Gothic tradition deepened this imagery. In the 18th and 19th centuries, novels filled with crumbling castles and haunted landscapes often used moonlight as a setting for madness. Picture a heroine pacing by a high window, her face lit by silver beams, her mind unraveling in solitude. Or a tormented figure wandering through ruins, the full moon glaring overhead as a silent witness. In these stories, moonlight is not passive. It is active, sharpening emotions, heightening tension, pushing fragile minds toward collapse. Romantic poets, too, made the moon their companion. For them, the moon was often a symbol of inspiration, but that inspiration sometimes verged on delirium. Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote of the moon as a restless presence, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the smallness of human life. Lord Byron, with his taste for the dramatic, often cast the moon as a backdrop for lonely figures adrift in their own turbulent thoughts. Even William Wordsworth, who usually praised the calming beauty of nature, sometimes described the moon as unsettling, stirring strange moods in the heart of the wanderer. The idea of being moonstruck became a literary trope. It suggested not only romance, but also obsession, irrationality, and a kind of sweet madness. Lovers gazed at the moon and were carried away. Dreamers stared too long and lost themselves in reverie. To be moonstruck was to be suspended between inspiration and instability, a state at once desirable and dangerous. The 19th century also brought a growing interest in psychology, and writers began blending science with art. The French poet Gérard de Nerval, who himself struggled with mental illness, often used lunar imagery to describe his own experiences of madness. The moon for him was not only a symbol of mystery, but a personal reflection of inner turbulence. Literature became a place where lunar madness was explored not only as myth, but as lived reality. Even in modern times, the motif has not disappeared. Contemporary novels and films continue to use the moon as shorthand for instability, for enchantment, or for crossing the boundary between sense and nonsense. A character raving beneath a full moon, or caught in its glow, is immediately legible to us. We inherit centuries of association, centuries of stories that have taught us to see lunar light as a companion to disorder. What makes this particularly powerful is that literature doesn't need to argue the point. It simply assumes it. A line about the moon can carry with it layers of cultural memory, layers of superstition and fear, without any explanation at all. Writers draw on this reservoir instinctively, and readers recognize it without effort. In this way, the arts mirror what we've already seen in language and law. The moon's association with madness is not a minor theme or a passing fancy. It is a deep current, flowing through words, through stories, through the imagination of entire cultures. And from literature, the trail leads naturally to another symbolic connection, one that has shaped myths and medical theories alike. For if the moon's phases were believed to influence the mind, they were also believed to govern the body, especially the cycles of fertility and reproduction. And it is here, in the rhythms of life itself, that the lunar link to madness takes on a new dimension. The moon has always been more than a light in the sky. Its steady rhythm of waxing and waning has made it one of humanity's most natural clocks. And for many cultures, the most striking rhythm it seemed to echo was not the tides of the ocean, but the cycles of the human body. A lunar cycle takes about 29.5 days. The menstrual cycle, for many women, averages a similar length. This alignment did not go unnoticed. For thousands of years, people believed that the moon governed fertility, reproduction, and the mysteries of life itself. From this belief, a strong link was drawn between the moon, women, and the shifting line between balance and imbalance in the mind. In ancient cultures, goddesses of the moon were often also goddesses of fertility. The Greek goddess Selene was not only the embodiment of the moon's glow, but also a symbol of love and reproduction. Artemis, another lunar figure, was associated with both virginity and childbirth, embodying the paradox of control and release. In India, the moon god Chandra was believed to nourish plants, animals, and people alike, his cycles seen as feeding the fertility of the earth. Because of these associations, the moon was thought to affect not only the body, but also the emotions and the mind. Periods of fertility and infertility, of ease and discomfort, were often seen as reflections of the moon's shifting phases. The same glow that pulled the tides was believed to pull at the hidden waters of the body. Just as the ocean rises and falls, so too, it was thought, did the moods and health of women rise and fall under the moon's watch. In folklore, this connection often blurred into superstition. Some traditions warned against conceiving children under certain phases of the moon, fearing the child might inherit instability or weakness. Others encouraged it. believing the moon could bless a child with strength or wisdom. The same glow that was said to cause madness in some was said to grant special gifts to others. Even today, traces of these old ideas remain in language. To say someone is moody can still carry echoes of lunar rhythm. The word month itself comes from the same root as moon, reminding us how closely human timekeeping once followed the phases above. Modern science has examined these claims with mixed results. Some studies have explored whether menstrual cycles are more likely to align with the full moon or new moon, though the evidence is far from conclusive. Others have tested whether fertility or birth rates shift with lunar phases. The results are complex and often contradictory, but the fact that we still ask the question shows how deeply the association is etched into human imagination. What is certain is that the moon, by providing a clear and visible cycle in the sky, gave people a powerful symbol for understanding cycles within themselves. The regularity of its waxing and waning made it an anchor in a world where so much else was unpredictable. And yet, its glow was also unsettling, inspiring not only comfort, but unease. That unease, when mapped onto fertility and reproduction, could easily be interpreted as instability or madness. In this way, the moon became both a guide and a warning. A guide to the rhythms of life, and a warning that those rhythms could falter. A symbol of creation and a reminder of fragility. To live in harmony with the moon was to live in harmony with nature. To fall out of step with it was to risk imbalance of body and mind. This duality, the moon as both nurturer and disturber, is one we'll see again and again, and it is especially vivid in mythology, where lunar deities are often both protectors and tricksters, figures of inspiration and chaos. To explore this next, we turn to the divine faces of the moon and the strange ways in which gods and goddesses themselves were linked to madness. When people looked up at the moon, they often didn't see a lifeless rock. They saw a face, a presence, a being who watched over them. In mythology, the moon was not just an object in the sky, but a personality, a force of nature given human traits. And just as the moon was linked to fertility and change, it was also tied to madness, inspiration, and visions. In ancient Greece, one of the earliest lunar figures was Selene. She was depicted as a radiant goddess, driving a silver chariot across the night sky. Selene was beautiful and constant, yet her love stories often hinted at instability and longing. One tale describes her falling in love with Endymion, a mortal shepherd. To preserve his beauty, she asked Zeus to place him in eternal sleep. Night after night, she visited him as he dreamed. In this story, the moon is not only a symbol of love, but of strange desire, a goddess bound to a dreamer who would never awaken. There is something unsettling in that image, a blend of tenderness and obsession that borders on madness. Another Greek figure, Artemis, also carried lunar associations. Known as the goddess of the hunt, she was fiercely independent, resisting marriage and male pursuit. Yet she was also linked to childbirth, guiding women through pain and danger. Artemis embodied contradiction, both protector and destroyer, serene yet fierce. In her, the moon's dual nature is reflected, cool and calm one moment, sharp and cutting the next. In Roman tradition, the goddess Luna represented the moon more directly. She was worshipped in rituals meant to guard against instability of mind and body. People prayed to her not only for fertility, but also for balance and clarity, hoping to shield themselves from the darker side of her influence. Other cultures also saw the moon as divine. In Mesopotamia, the moon god Sin was both wise and unpredictable, a being who measured time yet could also stir disorder. In India, Chandra was a lunar deity whose phases symbolized the waxing and waning of energy. Sometimes gentle, sometimes erratic, Chandra embodied moods that felt deeply familiar to human experience. These gods and goddesses remind us of something important. The moon has always been more than a light. It has been a mirror for our own inner states. When people felt pulled between calm and chaos, they saw the same duality in the sky. When their emotions shifted with invisible tides, they imagined the moon as the one pulling the strings. Madness, in this context, was not always seen as purely negative. Sometimes it was framed as divine inspiration. In Greece, the idea of mania could refer not only to disorder, but also to a sacred frenzy, a state in which the gods spoke through a person. To be touched by the moon might mean to lose balance, but it could also mean to see more clearly, to glimpse truths hidden from the ordinary mind. This sacred madness shows us another side of the story. The moon was not only blamed for instability, it was also praised for visions, for creativity, for the ability to connect with something beyond the self. The same glow that sent some wandering in confusion could send others speaking in poetry. The line between madness and inspiration was thin, and the moon stood right on that boundary. It is no wonder, then, that so many rituals and festivals were timed to lunar phases. To align oneself with the moon was to open a doorway into states of mind that were usually hidden. Whether dangerous or divine, the night sky offered something more than simple darkness. It offered a cycle of possibility. And so, the moon became not just a goddess of beauty, but a goddess of the night in all its forms. Calm, fertile, mysterious, and at times unsettling. To pray to her was to ask for both protection and revelation, both serenity and frenzy. She was a reminder that the mind itself is lunar, shifting, cyclical, sometimes illuminated, sometimes shadowed. From these myths of divine influence, the connection to madness deepens further. For if the moon could inspire prophecy and vision, then it was also believed to play a role in the strange, ecstatic states of oracles and seers. Which brings us next to prophecy itself, and the ways the moon was thought to open the mind to glimpses of the future. From the earliest times, people have turned their gaze to the sky in search of meaning. The stars were maps, the sun a clock, and the moon a companion that seemed to whisper secrets through its cycles. Among the many roles it played, one of the most fascinating was its link to prophecy. The belief that the moon could open the human mind to visions, dreams, and glimpses of the future. In the temples of ancient Greece, oracles often spoke of inspiration as a kind of divine madness. Plato himself described it this way. Not all madness, he wrote, is harmful. Some forms are gifts from the gods. The madness of prophecy was one of these. It was thought that in a state of frenzy, a departure from ordinary reason, the soul could hear truths that were otherwise hidden. And since the moon was already tied to cycles of fertility, emotion, and shifting moods, it was natural to see it as a trigger for such states. The oracle at Delphi, though primarily associated with Apollo, was often described in terms that echo lunar imagery. The Pythia, seated over vapors, would enter a trance and speak words that seemed disjointed, sometimes incoherent, but believed to carry divine insight. Observers might have seen the resemblance between her state and the wandering minds of those said to be moonstruck. To be touched by the gods and to be touched by the moon were not so far apart. In Rome, too, augurs and astrologers looked to the moon as a key marker of fate. Its phases were read as signs, its eclipses as warnings, its cycles as messages about the future. The moon was not only a clock for measuring time, but a book to be read. A full moon could mean abundance, a new moon secrecy, an eclipse upheaval. The moon's changing face became a language, and those who claimed to interpret it often spoke in ways that bordered on madness. Across other cultures, we find similar threads. In parts of Africa, the moon was linked to diviners who cast bones or read patterns in firelight, believing that lunar cycles gave strength to their visions. In Asia, lunar festivals often carried rituals of meditation and altered states, where people sought to glimpse beyond the present moment. Again and again, the moon was seen not only as a light, but as a threshold, a way of stepping outside of ordinary awareness. Dreams were also folded into this belief. Because the moon ruled the night, it was often thought to rule dreams as well. A vivid dream during a full moon might be taken as a prophecy, a glimpse of what was to come. Stories spread of dreamers who foresaw events, guided by the glow that slipped through their windows. To this day, people sometimes claim that dreams feel stranger, more intense or more memorable when the moon is full. Of course, modern science tends to explain prophecy differently. Psychology sees visions and trances as expressions of the unconscious mind, or as responses to altered states of the brain. Studies of the moon's effect on dreams and behavior are mixed and often inconclusive. But the belief itself has endured, perhaps because it fits so neatly with the experience of looking up at the moon. To see its shifting face is to sense that time is not flat, but cyclical, that past and future are turning endlessly, and that in certain moments, the veil might lift. This belief in lunar prophecy shows us something important about the link between the moon and madness. Madness, in these traditions, was not always a breakdown. Sometimes it was a breakthrough. To lose touch with ordinary reason was to gain access to something larger, something cosmic. In that sense, the moon was not only feared for causing disorder, but revered for granting vision. And so the line between seer and lunatic blurred. The same states that looked like confusion to some were honored as prophecy by others. Under the moon's glow, both were possible. The night could bring madness, or it could bring revelation. And often people were not sure where one ended and the other began. From here, it is only a small step to the next thread in our story. The long-standing folklore that under a full moon, not only prophets, but ordinary people, were more likely to act strangely, sometimes with consequences that reached into crime, violence, and fear. If the moon could inspire prophecy, it could just as easily inspire fear. Across centuries, people believed that when the full moon rose, the world grew more dangerous. Restlessness turned to recklessness. Strange behavior tipped into crime. And so, a body of folklore grew around the idea that the full moon was not only a symbol of madness, but a direct cause of mischief, violence, and unrest. In rural villages, stories were told of people acting strangely under its glow. Arguments flared more easily, tempers ran hotter, and brawls were said to break out with greater frequency. Farmers might shake their heads at a theft that occurred on a bright moonlit night, muttering that the moon itself had stirred the culprit's boldness. Even the animals seemed to join in. Dogs barking wildly, horses spooked, wolves howling in chorus. The belief spread into urban areas as well. In medieval towns, people whispered that crime was more common during full moons. Robbers, it was said, preferred moonlit nights for their work. The light gave them vision, but also, according to superstition, gave them nerve. To commit a crime under the full moon was to be swept up in its influence, daring what one might never attempt under a darker sky. This belief grew strong enough that, in some places, officials made note of it. Records from the 18th and 19th centuries show constables in Europe expecting busier nights during the full moon. Folklore bled into policing, shaping the rhythm of watch and patrol. Even today, you'll find police officers who joke that a full moon means more calls, more incidents, more unrest. Whether the numbers truly support it or not, the expectation itself has become part of the culture. The connection between moonlight and crime may have had practical roots as well. Before the invention of gas lamps and electricity, the full moon was the brightest natural light available at night. It made travel easier, but it also made mischief easier. A thief or wanderer did not need a torch or lantern when the landscape was lit by silver. With that light came both opportunity and suspicion. The moon made the night visible, and therefore more dangerous. But beyond the practical, the psychological weight of the full moon lingered. People believed it had power over the mind, and so any unusual behavior could be blamed on it. A violent outburst, a rash decision, a sudden theft, all could be explained away as the work of lunar influence. This made the moon a convenient scapegoat, but also a fearful presence. One never knew what strange impulses might rise when the night sky glowed so brightly. Even literature captured this sense of danger. Writers described moonlit murders, moonlit duels, moonlit betrayals. The pale light became a stage for tragedy, its brightness both exposing and distorting human actions. To stand beneath a full moon was to risk seeing the worst in others or in oneself. In modern times, studies have tried to measure whether crime actually increases during a full moon. Most evidence suggests that the effect is minimal, if present at all. But the belief remains stubborn. Emergency workers, police officers, and hospital staff often report that full moon nights feel different. Busier, more chaotic, more unpredictable. Perhaps this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, born from centuries of folklore. Or perhaps the glow itself does stir us, even in subtle ways. What matters most, for our journey, is how firmly the connection has been planted in imagination. The full moon became a symbol of danger, a time when the veil of civility grew thin and hidden impulses came to the surface. To live under its glow was to live with the awareness that the ordinary rules might bend, that the night might hold something uncanny. And from here, the story leads naturally into science, into the centuries when doctors and philosophers tried to explain this supposed link. If the moon really did influence the mind, how could it do so? What mechanism tied its glow to our thoughts and behaviors? This question carried us from folklore into the halls of medicine, where theories about humors, fluids, and tidal forces attempted to make sense of lunar madness. For centuries, stories and laws carried the idea that the moon could disturb the human mind. But eventually, philosophers and physicians began to ask a deeper question. If this is true, how exactly does it happen? Folklore could describe it, literature could dramatize it, but science wanted an explanation. And so, across history, we find doctors and thinkers trying to measure lunar madness, to anchor it in biology, in physics, in the mysterious workings of the body. One of the earliest explanations came from the ancient theory of the four humors. In this model, the human body was thought to be governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance, and illness meant imbalance. The moon, people believed, could disrupt this balance, just as it pulled at the tides of the sea. Its light and presence might stir the fluids within, causing restlessness, agitation, or delirium. A full moon, in this view, was not just beautiful. It was a force capable of tipping the delicate scale of the body's harmony. This theory persisted into the Middle Ages. Physicians warned against sleeping under moonlight, suggesting that the rays could disturb the brain's natural stability. Some described the moon as having a cold and moist quality, which, when absorbed, could unsettle the mind. Others believed it weakened the nervous system, leaving people vulnerable to seizures, hallucinations, or fits. These ideas blended observation with superstition, creating a framework that felt scientific in its time, even as it leaned heavily on metaphor. By the Renaissance, the rise of astronomy and medicine encouraged new lines of thought. If the moon moved oceans, thinkers reasoned, perhaps it moved people as well. The human body, after all, is mostly water. Could not the same tidal forces that lifted waves also ripple through our veins, subtly shifting mood and thought? It was an elegant theory, one that captured imaginations. The moon as tide master of the mind became a popular idea, repeated by doctors and philosophers alike. And yet, no one could truly prove it. Observers noted patterns: restlessness in patients during full moons, crowded wards in asylums, strange outbreaks of agitation. But these patterns were often anecdotal. Records were inconsistent, expectations high, and results difficult to measure. Still, the belief was strong enough that many hospitals and asylums kept a wary eye on the lunar calendar. In the 18th and 19th centuries, with the growth of psychiatry, doctors began gathering more systematic data. Some wrote that admissions to asylums peaked during certain lunar phases. Others claimed that violent incidents were more frequent when the moon was full. These reports reinforced what many already believed. But the studies were far from rigorous, often shaped by the biases of those conducting them. If you expect a patient to worsen under a full moon, you may notice every small disturbance and record it as evidence. Even so, the persistence of these theories tells us something about human imagination. The moon feels like it should affect us. Its pull on the ocean is undeniable, and its cycles so neatly match the rhythms of time in our bodies and lives. To many, it seemed obvious that the mind could not be exempt from such influence. What is striking, though, is how these early attempts at explanation blurred the line between science and story. Physicians spoke in the language of humors, fluids, and tides, but beneath it all lay the same old suspicion that the moon was more than a celestial body. It was a presence, one that reached into our very selves. Modern science, of course, has largely set aside these old theories, yet echoes remain, even in casual conversation. When someone says a restless night must be because of the full moon, they are repeating an idea that has been shaped by centuries of medical speculation. And so, as we leave behind the humors and the tidal fluids, we step into the heart of the question itself: the moon's gravity. If it pulls oceans, could it truly pull on us? This became one of the most enduring explanations for lunar madness. The idea that our watery bodies were tides waiting to be stirred by the silver face above. Of all the explanations for lunar influence, perhaps none has been as enduring as the idea of gravity. The moon's pull on Earth is real, visible every day in the rising and falling of the tides. If the oceans can be lifted by that distant sphere, then surely many reasoned our bodies, made mostly of water, must also respond. In this view, lunar madness was not superstition at all, but simple physics. The logic feels compelling. Picture the sea at night, its surface rising under the invisible tug of the moon. The waves climb higher on the shore, then recede again as the moon drifts along its orbit. If entire oceans can respond to that pull, then how could the human brain, with its delicate balance of fluids, be exempt? To earlier thinkers, it seemed inevitable that the moon influenced us, just as it influenced the tides. This idea spread widely during the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods, when natural philosophy sought to explain old beliefs through new science. Physicians wrote that seizures, fevers, and fits often coincided with lunar phases. They pointed to the watery nature of the brain and nervous system as evidence. Perhaps, they said, the moon stirred those hidden tides, disrupting reason and releasing madness. Some even tried to calculate the influence, comparing the cycles of tides with cycles of mental illness. When patients grew restless, when outbreaks of delirium filled hospital wards, the full moon was often blamed. Though the evidence was thin, the explanation was elegant. It joined the physical and the psychological, uniting sky and body in a single theory. Modern science, however, paints a different picture. The moon's gravitational pull does affect Earth's oceans, but only because they are vast and free to move. Within the human body, the forces are far too small to make any measurable difference. The pull of the moon on a glass of water beside your bed is weaker than the pull of the chair you are sitting on. The gravitational force is there, but it is minuscule, drowned out by the nearness of objects around you. Still, the belief persists. Part of the reason is poetic. It feels right to imagine ourselves as little oceans, rising and falling with the moon, and part of it is experiential. Many people report feeling restless or wakeful during a full moon, whether or not gravity plays a role. In the absence of certainty, imagination fills the gap, and the tide theory remains a satisfying story. Interestingly, the connection between tides and the mind has left marks in culture beyond science. Poets and writers have described emotions as tidal, moods as rising and falling like waves. The language of gravity, of pull and sway, mirrors the way we often experience our inner world. We speak of being pulled by desire, overwhelmed by emotion, carried away by a surge. The moon, silently tugging at oceans, becomes an image for the forces we feel inside ourselves. Even today, you will sometimes hear doctors or nurses say that the emergency room grows busier during the full moon, or that psychiatric patients are more unsettled. Studies have found little consistent evidence to support this, but the stories endure. Perhaps because the moon is so visible, so present, it becomes an easy marker for unusual nights. When something strange happens, we look up, see the silver circle, and nod. Of course. The full moon. So while physics may not support the idea that gravity drives lunar madness, the story itself continues to resonate. It reflects a deep human tendency to connect the movements of the heavens with the movements of the mind. We are drawn to the idea that the same rhythms shaping oceans also shape us. Whether or not the science holds, the metaphor remains powerful. And from here, the story flows naturally into another scientific angle. Not gravity, but light. For the moon not only pulls on the seas, it shines into our nights. And long before electricity, that pale glow was the brightest light most people knew after sunset. Could it be that the moon's influence on our minds comes not from its gravity, but from its interference with our sleep? This leads us into the realm of circadian rhythms, melatonin, and the subtle ways moonlight may shape our nights. When we speak of the moon's influence on the mind, it is easy to imagine invisible forces, tides in the blood, gravitational pulls on the brain. But sometimes, the simplest explanation is also the most convincing. The moon does not just pull, it shines. And for most of human history, Its light was the strongest source of illumination after sunset. To understand lunar madness, we must first understand how light shapes our rhythms and how the moon may have unsettled the fragile machinery of sleep. The human body is guided by an internal clock. This clock is not measured in hours or minutes, but in cycles, a natural rhythm known as the circadian rhythm. It tells us when to wake and when to rest, when to be alert and when to grow drowsy. Sunlight is the master signal, keeping this clock aligned with the turning of the earth. When the sun rises, our bodies release hormones that promote wakefulness. When darkness falls, the pineal gland releases melatonin, inviting sleep. But the night is not always equally dark. On the nights of a new moon, the world can be pitch black, the stars sharp and piercing in their brilliance. On the nights of a full moon, however, the landscape glows. Shadows stretch long, trees gleam silver, and a faint brightness filters even through shutters and cloth. For people without electric lights, this difference was dramatic. It meant that the cycle of sleep could be altered by the phase of the moon. Some anthropologists suggest that communities once organized parts of their activity around lunar phases. Hunting, traveling, and festivals were easier under a bright sky. A full moon meant more movement, more noise, more wakefulness. And with wakefulness came disruption. Sleep cut short, nights restless, tempers unsteady. Over generations, the pattern would be easy to notice. People behaved differently when the moon was full. Modern science has begun to test this old idea. A study published in 2013 suggested that participants took longer to fall asleep and slept more lightly during the full moon, even when they were in darkened rooms. Melatonin levels appeared to drop, as though the body sensed something unusual. Other studies have found weaker or inconsistent effects, but the possibility remains intriguing. Could our bodies still be subtly tuned to the glow of the moon, remembering a time when its light governed our nights? If so, the explanation for lunar madness becomes more grounded. It is not that the moon stirs fluids or tugs on hidden tides, but that it simply changes how we sleep. Less sleep can mean more irritability. Broken sleep can mean more confusion, especially for those already vulnerable. A restless village under a full moon might easily produce more arguments, more wanderings, more outbursts, enough to convince people that the moon itself was a cause. And yet, even this explanation has its poetry. The idea that our inner clocks are tied not only to the blazing sun, but also to the gentle light of the moon reminds us that humans have always lived by the sky. Long before artificial lamps, we were guided by rhythms above us, our nights shaped by the waxing and waning of a distant sphere. To be moonstruck might mean nothing more mysterious than being awake when we ought to be asleep. Still, the suspicion that something stranger is at play persists. Even today, people claim to feel restless under the full moon, to dream more vividly, to wake more often. Whether the effect is biological or psychological, or a blend of both, the belief has endured. The moon feels like a force not only over oceans, but over our very moods. And so, science turns its gaze more sharply, asking, if sleep and behavior really change with the moon, can we measure it? Do hospitals grow busier? Do crimes increase? Do psychiatric wards fill? These questions lead us into the realm of modern studies, where the myths of lunar madness meet the data of contemporary research. For centuries, people trusted their observations. Villagers saw more arguments on bright nights. Nurses reported restless patients. Police officers noted busier shifts. The pattern seemed obvious. The full moon unsettled human behavior. But in the modern era, science has asked a sharper question. Is any of this truly measurable? Do the numbers confirm what the stories have always claimed? Researchers have approached this puzzle in many ways. Some have counted hospital admissions, tracking whether psychiatric wards see more patients during full moons. Others have examined crime statistics, searching for spikes in assaults, thefts, or accidents. Still others have surveyed sleep patterns, asking whether people really rest less when the moon is bright. The results, however, are complicated. Many studies find little to no consistent evidence. Crime rates, when examined across large populations, do not show clear increases tied to lunar phases. Emergency room visits rise and fall, but not in ways that align neatly with the moon's calendar. Psychiatric admissions tell a similar story. Some studies report slight increases around the full moon, while others find no connection at all. And yet, despite the lack of strong statistical support, the belief continues. Part of this may come down to expectation. When doctors or police officers anticipate unusual nights during a full moon, they are more likely to notice and remember any disturbance. A single strange event on a bright night may confirm the suspicion, while a quiet full moon may simply be forgotten. This is known as confirmation bias, the tendency to see what we expect to see. Over generations, such memories accumulate into folklore, even if the data does not agree. Still, a few findings keep the mystery alive. The 2013 study from Switzerland, which suggested shorter and lighter sleep during full moons, sparked wide interest. Though the sample was small, the idea that lunar cycles could influence melatonin levels gave the old belief a modern twist. Other experiments have found similar hints, though replication has been inconsistent. Science does not close the door entirely. It simply notes that the evidence is fragile, difficult to pin down. One curious detail is that even when people are not aware of the lunar phase, subtle effects may still appear. In some sleep studies, participants had no view of the sky and no knowledge of the moon's cycle, yet their rest patterns shifted slightly around the full moon. Whether this is coincidence or an echo of some deeper rhythm remains unclear, but it adds just enough intrigue to keep the question open. Beyond the lab, cultural influence plays its role. In hospitals, for example, nurses may brace themselves for chaotic nights when the moon is full. Their heightened vigilance can make them more aware of disturbances that might otherwise pass unnoticed. Police officers may swap stories of wild full moon shifts, reinforcing one another's beliefs. Even teachers sometimes report that children seem more restless, more distracted, when the moon is round and bright. Whether real or imagined, these patterns shape the experience of countless people. Perhaps this is the most important point. The moon's influence may not need to be physical to be real. If enough people believe that the full moon makes nights stranger, they behave as though it does. Their actions, their attentiveness, their storytelling, all contribute to the creation of a pattern that feels solid, even if it is woven more from perception than from fact. The moon becomes a stage upon which human imagination acts, amplifying the oddities that occur during its glow. So the data remains inconclusive. Science leans towards skepticism, but never fully erases the mystery. And perhaps that is fitting. The moon has always hovered between certainty and story, between measurable fact and poetic influence. To expect a final answer may be to miss the point. What matters is that people continue to sense something uncanny in its presence. A quiet room feels different under the full moon. A dream feels stranger. A night feels longer. These impressions may never yield clean numbers, but they are real in their persistence. And if humans sense the moon's influence, might not animals feel it too? After all, much of the folklore about lunar madness includes not only people, but creatures of the night, wolves, owls, and countless others. To explore this, we must turn our gaze from human restlessness to the animal kingdom and ask how the full moon shapes their behavior. If humans have long suspected that the moon unsettles the mind, they have also noticed that it stirs the animal world. On nights of the full moon, the natural world seems louder, busier, more alive. Wolves howl, owls call, insects buzz, and the silhouettes of nocturnal creatures slip across the ground in silver light. The connection between moonlight and animal behavior is one of the most enduring observations in folklore, and one of the most fascinating in modern science. For predators, the full moon is both a blessing and a challenge. The extra light makes hunting easier, illuminating prey that might otherwise hide in darkness. Cats, foxes, and owls are often more active during bright nights, seizing opportunities to spot food from a distance. Yet the same brightness also makes the hunters more visible. Prey animals, alert to the danger, may grow cautious, staying closer to cover or delaying their movements until the moon begins to wane. Thus, the full moon can reshape the delicate balance of predator and prey, shifting the rhythm of the entire food chain. Wolves, with their haunting howls, are perhaps the most famous lunar animals. For centuries, people believed they howled at the moon, lifting their voices in worship or frenzy. In truth, wolves howl to communicate with one another, to mark territory, to gather the pack. But the sight of a wolf silhouetted against the glowing disk has burned itself into human imagination. Even if the moon does not directly cause the howl, it frames it, making it unforgettable. Smaller creatures respond too. Studies have shown that rodents alter their behavior depending on lunar phases. On full moon nights, they are less likely to venture far from cover, aware that predators can see them more easily. Some species of fish time their spawning to the cycle of the moon, releasing eggs during certain phases to increase survival chances. Sea turtles, too, have been observed coordinating their nesting with lunar light, guiding their hatchlings by the brightness of the moonlit shore. Insects are perhaps the most delicate lunar navigators. Many species of moths use the moon for orientation, keeping its glow at a constant angle to fly in straight lines. Artificial lights can confuse them, drawing them in spirals around street lamps. But long before electricity, their wings were guided by the steady beacon above. The moon was not only a source of rhythm, but a compass. For nocturnal animals as a whole, the moon is a second sun, shaping behavior in ways both subtle and profound. To ancient observers, these patterns were unmistakable. A restless forest during a full moon seemed to echo the restlessness of people. If creatures were stirred, why not humans as well? The line between natural response and supernatural influence blurred easily. Modern researchers continue to study these connections, and the findings are complex. Some animals truly do shift their activity during lunar phases, while others seem unaffected. What is clear, though, is that the moonlight changes the stage. It alters visibility, reshapes risk, and creates rhythms that echo through ecosystems. This awareness may have fueled human superstition. A villager hearing wolves cry in the distance, seeing owls swoop more often, or noticing restless livestock might well assume that the moon itself was stirring chaos. The entire world seemed more active, more unpredictable. It was not difficult to believe that people, too, were caught in the same current. And so, the moon's connection to madness is not only a human story, It is an ecological one. We are part of a larger world that responds to cycles of light and shadow. Our ancestors, living closer to nature, saw these patterns more vividly than we do today. Their conclusion was simple. The full moon is a time of change, of strangeness, of heightened risk. From this recognition grew another layer of belief, that the moon did not merely stir waking life, but reached into the world of dreams as well. If animals behaved differently under the moon, might not dreams, those inner night wanderings, also take on new shapes? And so we turn next to the strange and poetic link between moonlight and the dream world. If the full moon can stir the forests and seas, if it can change the patterns of wolves and owls, then it is only natural that people have wondered whether it might reach into the hidden landscapes of the mind as well. Dreams, those private stories we wander through each night, have long been linked to lunar cycles. And in many cultures, a dream beneath the moonlight was thought to carry special meaning. Imagine lying in a small cottage hundreds of years ago. The shutters are thin, and the glow of the full moon leaks through the cracks, painting the walls in silver. Sleep comes, but it is shallow. Shadows flicker, and the room feels alive. In such a setting, a dream might feel sharper, stranger, more vivid. When morning comes, the dream lingers, and the memory of the moon above seems inseparable from it. In folklore, people often describe dreams under the full moon as prophetic. Some claimed they could see glimpses of the future. Others said their dreams grew chaotic, filled with images of fire, water, or wandering spirits. The moon was thought to act as a bridge, carrying visions from the heavens into the sleeper's mind. To dream during a full moon was to be visited by something beyond the ordinary self. Poets, too, were fascinated by this connection. The phrase moonstruck did not always mean madness. Sometimes it meant inspiration, a state in which dreams spilled into waking life, fueling art and imagination. To sleep under moonlight was to invite strange muses, to open the mind to images that might never appear in darker nights. The dream became not only a private experience, but a gift from the sky. Even today, many people claim their dreams feel different when the moon is full. Some describe them as more intense or more easily remembered. Others say they are unsettling, filled with unusual characters or surreal scenes. Scientific studies on this are mixed, but one experiment found that participants slept more lightly and reported more vivid dreams during the full moon, even when they could not see it. This raises intriguing questions. Are our bodies still tuned, in some hidden way, to the lunar cycle? Or is it the power of suggestion, an ancient belief that lingers in the subconscious? In some traditions, dreams under the moon were seen as dangerous. Parents warned children not to sleep with moonlight on their faces, fearing that the glow could bring nightmares or even sickness. The rays were thought to pierce too deeply, disturbing the delicate balance of sleep. In other places, however, dreams under the moon were sought after. Rituals encouraged sleeping in open courtyards during full moons, inviting visions that could guide decisions or reveal hidden truths. The moon's association with dreams also fits neatly with its broader symbolism. Just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, dreams reflect the light of waking life. Both are mirrors, showing us not the world as it is, but as it appears through the shifting filters of perception. To call a dream lunar was to call it shadowy, partial, mysterious, full of hints, but never complete. For those already vulnerable to instability, this could be unsettling. A troubled dream might be taken as proof that the moon had unsettled the mind. A peaceful dream, by contrast, could be seen as a blessing from above. Either way, the link was firm. The moon shaped not only behavior, but the stories of sleep. And so, just as wolves are imagined to howl at the moon, humans were imagined to dream beneath it, their inner lives reshaped by its glow. Whether by suggestion, by altered sleep cycles, or by something more mysterious, the moon and the dream world remain tied together in imagination. From here, it is only natural to ask how these images made their way into art. If poets and storytellers saw the moon as a dream bringer, then painters, composers, and dramatists also gave it a place in their visions. The next step in our journey takes us into the gallery of lunar art, where madness and beauty are painted side by side. Throughout history, artists have turned to the moon as a source of inspiration. Its pale glow has been painted, sung about, and written into verse. But the moon was never only a symbol of beauty. Just as often, it was a symbol of instability, of enchantment, of slipping beyond the borders of ordinary reason. To explore lunar madness in art is to see how deeply the image of the moon has shaped the creative imagination. In painting, the moon often appears as more than a background. In works from the Romantic period, it is a central character, large, luminous, casting eerie light over landscapes and figures. Caspar David Friedrich, for instance, painted vast skies where the moon hung low and haunting, filling the canvas with silence and mystery. His figures stood small beneath it, dwarfed not only by nature, but by the uncanny presence of the night. These works did not depict madness directly, but the mood of unease, of isolation, was unmistakable. The moon was a mirror for the inner turmoil of the soul. Poets, too, made the moon their companion in exploring instability. In the 19th century, the English poet Percy Bysshe Shelley described the moon as restless, a figure whose wan smile reflected human sorrow. Lord Byron filled his verses with moonlit wanderers, lonely and driven by passions they could not control. Even William Blake, with his mystical vision, saw the moon as both a guide and a deceiver, offering glimpses of higher truth while also unsettling the mind. The Romantic era, with its fascination for the sublime, that mixture of beauty and terror, found in the moon a perfect subject. Its light was soft, yet overwhelming. Its presence was calm, yet unsettling. For artists seeking to capture the strange boundary between wonder and fear, the moon became an endless well of imagery. Music, too, carried these associations. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata is perhaps the most famous example. Though the title was not his own, the piece came to be linked with moonlight because of its haunting, dreamlike quality. Its slow opening movement feels suspended, as though drifting through a half-lit landscape between wakefulness and sleep. Later composers followed suit, weaving the moon into nocturnes, tone poems, and operas, where its glow suggested both romance and unease. In literature, the image of the moonstruck lover became almost cliché. To be moonstruck was to be irrationally consumed, sometimes by love, sometimes by madness, sometimes by both. The moon was shorthand for a state of being overcome, pulled out of ordinary balance. Shakespeare had already planted these seeds, but later writers expanded them, creating characters who gazed at the moon too long and lost themselves in its glow. Even in modern times, the moon retains its place as a symbol of madness in art. Films often use the full moon to signal instability, horror, or transformation. A character bathed in moonlight may be understood as haunted, obsessed, or on the verge of collapse. The visual shorthand is so powerful that no words are needed. The audience feels the association instantly. What is striking in all of this is that the moon never appears as only one thing. It is not only beautiful, not only frightening, not only romantic, not only mad. It is all of these at once. Artists have always been drawn to its duality, its soft light that soothes, and its eerie glow that unsettles. It is precisely this ambiguity that makes it so powerful a symbol. To depict the moon is to depict the human mind itself, changeable, reflective, bright, and shadowed by turns. It can illuminate, but it can also distort. And in this way, the arts capture the essence of lunar madness better than any scientific theory could. They show us not what is measurable, but what is felt. From the gallery of art, we move naturally to a gentler theme. For while the moon has been a symbol of madness and unease, it has also been a companion to love and tenderness. In poetry, song, and story, it is the light under which lovers meet, the witness to promises whispered in the night. The next step in our journey will explore this softer side, the romance of the moon. For all its associations with madness and unease, the moon has also been one of humanity's greatest symbols of love. Its light has been compared to the glow of a beloved's face, its cycles to the rhythms of passion and longing. To walk beneath the moon with another person has, for centuries, been considered a gesture of intimacy, as though the silver sky itself blessed the moment. The moon's romance is partly practical. Before electricity, lovers needed light to walk together at night. The full moon provided it, a glow bright enough to guide steps, yet soft enough to invite secrecy and closeness. Starlight sparkled, but it was the moon that created shadows long enough to hide in, brightness tender enough to soften expressions. In this way, the moon became not just a companion, but a collaborator in courtship. Poets and writers seized on this image. In Chinese poetry, the moon often serves as a bridge between distant lovers. Separated by mountains or seas, they look up at the same glowing disk and feel connected, even when far apart. In Japanese literature, moon viewing festivals became occasions for romance as well as reflection, the shared gaze upward acting as a bond between souls. The phrase, sharing the same moon, remains a metaphor for love across distance, reminding us that no matter where we are, the same light falls on us all. In the West, romantic poets described the moon as the confidant of lovers. Shelley, Byron, and Keats all wrote verses where moonlight bathed tender scenes, heightening emotion. To be moonstruck in this context was not madness, but enchantment. It meant being consumed by love so deeply that reason gave way to passion. The moon, with its pull on tides and time, seemed a fitting symbol for emotions that swell and recede with equal force. Music, too, has carried the romance of the moon. Songs across cultures describe moonlit nights as perfect settings for declarations of affection. In opera, the moon is often present in moments of longing. In folk ballads, it is the silent witness to secret meetings. Even today, popular songs call the moon into the language of love. Fly me to the moon, Moon River, dancing in the moonlight. The association has never faded. Part of the moon's romantic power lies in its distance. Unlike the sun, which dominates the sky, the moon feels approachable. It is gentle, not blinding. It invites gazing, lingering, dreaming. Its light does not command, but caresses. In its phases, lovers saw symbols of growth and decline, passion waxing and waning, intimacy sometimes bright, sometimes hidden. The moon offered a natural metaphor for the ebb and flow of relationships. And yet, even here, a trace of madness lingers. To be moonstruck in love is to lose oneself, to be swept away in emotion beyond control. The line between love and obsession, tenderness and frenzy, is as thin as the crescent that hangs in the twilight sky. The same glow that comforts can also intoxicate, reminding us that romance, like madness, is a state of surrender. Perhaps that is why the moon has remained so constant in stories of love. It embodies the paradox, calm and passion, serenity and longing. Lovers walking under its light may feel both safe and unsteady, held and vulnerable. The moon reflects not only faces but feelings, magnifying them, turning the ordinary into something dreamlike. From romance, the path leads naturally to culture. If the moon has been a companion to lovers in the West, in the East, it has been honored in festivals, poems, and rituals that celebrate its beauty. These traditions remind us that while madness and romance are strong themes, the moon can also symbolize harmony, community, and serenity. And so we turn now to the moon in Eastern traditions, where its glow is seen not as disturbing, but as a source of connection and peace. So far, we have explored the moon as a symbol of madness, as a source of fear, and as a companion to love. But in many parts of the world, the moon has also been celebrated as a bringer of peace, harmony, and reflection. In Eastern traditions especially, its presence is not only unsettling or intoxicating, but deeply serene. To look at the moon is to feel connected to family, to community, and to the cycles of nature itself. In China, the moon has long been honored in poetry and festival. The Mid-Autumn Festival, sometimes called the Moon Festival, is one of the most cherished celebrations of the year. Families gather to share mooncakes, to light lanterns, and to look up together at the full moon. It is a holiday of reunion, when loved ones near and far are thought to be joined by gazing at the same glowing disk. Ancient poets like Li Bai wrote countless verses to the moon, describing it as a companion in solitude, a silent listener to human joys and sorrows. For him, to raise a cup of wine to the moon was to drink with a friend in the sky. In Japan, the tradition of tsukimi, moon viewing, carries a similar reverence. During the harvest season, people sit together to admire the beauty of the full moon, often decorating with pampas grass and offering rice dumplings as tokens of respect. Unlike the Western association of the moon with madness or unease, Japanese tradition emphasizes stillness and appreciation. The moon is not a threat, but a muse for quiet reflection. Sitting beneath its glow, people are reminded of impermanence, of beauty that comes and goes, just as the moon itself waxes and wanes. In India, the moon is also woven into religious life. The god Chandra is depicted as radiant and youthful, riding a chariot pulled by antelopes. His phases are linked to time itself, marking the months of the Hindu calendar. Chandra is associated with both fertility and serenity, his light nourishing plants and guiding rituals. Festivals like Karva Chauth involve women fasting until they glimpse the rising moon, offering prayers for the health of their families. Here, the moon is a symbol not of madness, but of devotion and endurance. Across these traditions, a different pattern emerges. The moon is not feared as a disturber of the mind, but embraced as a bridge between people and nature, between loved ones across distance, between the human world and the divine. Where European folklore might have seen a restless sleepwalker or a howling wolf, Eastern traditions often saw harmony, continuity, and the comfort of cycles. This contrast reminds us of how cultural context shapes perception. The same moon hangs over us all, yet it carries different meanings depending on the stories we tell. Where one culture emphasizes danger, another emphasizes peace. Where one sees madness, another sees clarity. The moon itself does not change, but its reflection in human imagination does. Even so, traces of unease are never far away. Chinese folklore also tells of Chang'e, the moon goddess who lives in solitude after drinking an elixir of immortality. Her story carries both beauty and melancholy, a reminder that even in serenity, the moon holds mystery and longing. In Japan, too, ghost stories often use moonlit nights as settings, blending tranquility with a hint of the uncanny. Even in traditions that emphasize harmony, the duality of the moon persists. Perhaps this is why the moon is such a powerful symbol. It can be both gentle and unsettling, both communal and lonely, both serene and strange. In Eastern traditions, the balance leans toward peace, but the shadow of mystery always lingers. From these cultural celebrations, we circle back toward the deeper question: why does the moon so often blur boundaries between calm and chaos, between love and madness, between vision and delusion? The next step in our journey leads us into that liminal space, where madness itself is seen not only as a breakdown, but as an opening to the divine. When we think of madness today, we often picture illness, something to be diagnosed, treated, and perhaps even cured. But in older traditions, madness was not always seen as a failing. Sometimes it was understood as a gift, a sign that a person had been touched by forces larger than themselves. In this view, madness was otherworldly influence. Dangerous, yes, but also sacred. And the moon, with its strange glow and shifting phases, was thought to be one of the powers capable of opening that door. In ancient Greece, this idea was captured in the word mania. The philosopher Plato wrote that there were different kinds of madness, one born of human weakness, and others born of divine inspiration. Poetic madness, he said, came from the muses. Prophetic madness came from Apollo. Ritual madness came from Dionysus. And there was also a kind of madness that belonged to the moon, a loosening of the ordinary mind, a release from reason, that allowed glimpses of what lay beyond. This holy madness was not purely negative. It could bring visions, songs, or prophecies. The oracles who spoke in trances were revered, not shunned. Their disordered speech was believed to carry the voice of gods. The line between lunacy and inspiration was thin, and the moon's glow was often imagined as the spark that pushed a soul across it. In other cultures, too, lunar influence was seen as spiritual. In some indigenous traditions, the full moon was a time for ceremonies of dreaming and vision. The altered states reached under its light were not signs of weakness, but of connection to ancestors, to spirits, to the larger cycles of nature. To be restless under the full moon was to be participating in a cosmic rhythm, not merely suffering from it. Even within Christianity, traces of this perspective lingered. Medieval monks sometimes described moon madness as a kind of possession, but possession was not always viewed as random disorder. It could be interpreted as a test, a trial, or even a form of revelation. The afflicted person might speak truths they would not otherwise know, or embody a warning for the community. Though often feared, their state was also treated as significant, as though the moon itself had chosen them to carry a message. This way of seeing madness reflects something fundamental about human experience, the sense that losing reason is not only a collapse, but sometimes an opening. To step outside the boundaries of ordinary thought can mean danger, but it can also mean creativity, vision, or spiritual awakening. The moon, in its changeable nature, became the perfect symbol of this crossing. It waxes and wanes, hides and returns, mirrors and distorts. So too does the mind when touched by madness. Modern science may explain visions as hallucinations, trances as altered brain states, and prophecies as coincidences. Yet the older view reminds us that what we now call symptoms were once woven into stories of meaning. To be moonstruck was not just to lose control, but to be caught in the orbit of something vast and mysterious. The heavens bent close, and the mind responded. Even today, we sometimes echo this older way of thinking. We speak of artists as mad geniuses, of inspiration as a kind of fever, of creativity as possession. When a poet writes through the night under a full moon, or a musician speaks of songs arriving in sudden bursts, the language often slips into the imagery of lunacy. The moon remains a symbol of that liminal space, half madness, half revelation. From here, our journey shifts into modern times. The moon no longer hides its face from us. Astronauts have walked on its surface. Scientists have measured its dust. Yet even with this knowledge, the old associations linger. The question becomes, how has seeing the moon up close changed our sense of it? Has the madness faded, or has awe taken its place? To explore this, we turn to the 20th century, when humanity finally touched the moon itself. For thousands of years, the moon was untouchable. It hung above us as mystery, as myth, as mirror. It was blamed for madness, praised for fertility, honored in poetry, and feared in folklore. But in the 20th century, something remarkable happened. Human beings, with rockets and suits of metal, left Earth and set foot upon its surface. The untouchable became tangible. The distant goddess became ground beneath our boots. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the Sea of Tranquility, the world watched in awe. For a moment, the moon was no longer a symbol or a story. It was dust, rock, horizon. Photographs showed its barren surface, its craters and plains, its stark shadows under unfiltered sunlight. Scientists measured its gravity, collected its soil, and mapped its terrain. The moon, stripped of its mystery, seemed to become an object of science rather than imagination. And yet, something unexpected happened. Instead of ending the old associations, the astronauts' moon deepened them. Far from dispelling awe, the experience magnified it. Astronauts themselves spoke not only in technical terms, but in language of wonder, even reverence. Buzz Aldrin called it magnificent desolation. Others described a feeling of profound solitude, of standing in a place at once alien and familiar. Looking back at Earth from the moon, they saw our planet as a fragile blue sphere, suspended in blackness. The experience was not only scientific, it was spiritual. This shift is important. The moon was no longer imagined as the cause of madness, but it was still tied to states of mind beyond the ordinary. The astronauts' descriptions resembled the language of mystics and poets. They spoke of transcendence, of perspective, of emotions they could barely put into words. The old belief that the moon could alter consciousness found a new expression. Here it was, not through superstition, but through direct encounter. Back on Earth, the cultural impact was immense. The moon landing inspired art, music, and literature. Some works celebrated the triumph of science. Others mourned the loss of mystery, fearing that the moon, once sacred, had become ordinary. But as time passed, it became clear that the moon had not lost its power. Even as a place mapped and measured, it continued to inspire. Its craters, now named and catalogued, still carried a sense of the uncanny. Its silence, now heard in the recordings of astronauts, still felt profound. Perhaps this reveals something about human imagination. No matter how much we explain the moon, no matter how many facts we gather, it continues to live as symbol. Knowledge does not erase mystery, it only reshapes it. Where once the moon was blamed for lunacy, now it is revered for perspective. Where once it was feared as a disturber of sleep, now it is celebrated as a source of awe. The emotional truth remains. The moon changes us. In a way, the astronaut's moon brought us full circle. Ancient people saw the moon as a force that could pull the mind beyond itself. Modern astronauts, gazing back at Earth, described much the same. The mechanism was different, but the outcome was similar. An altered state, a shift in consciousness, a vision that lingered long after. And so, even with footprints on its surface, the moon is not diminished. It is both dust and dream, both rock and reflection. The madness may no longer be framed as possession or prophecy, but the sense of strangeness, of transformation, remains. The astronauts remind us that to stand beneath the moon is one thing, but to stand upon it is to feel the full weight of its silence. From this modern perspective, we can now take a step inward, to psychology, to the inner world. For beyond science and spaceflight, the moon has always symbolized the hidden side of the human mind. And in the work of Carl Jung, the moon becomes more than an object in the sky. It becomes an archetype, a mirror of the unconscious, a symbol of shadow and cycle. Science can measure the moon's gravity, photograph its craters, and record its cycles. But there is another way the moon has always lived within us, not as data, but as symbol. In the language of psychology, symbols matter because they carry meanings deeper than reason, woven into the fabric of the human mind. And perhaps no symbol has been more enduring or more enigmatic than the moon. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung often spoke of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of images, archetypes, and patterns of meaning that all humans carry. These images surface in myths, in dreams, and in art across cultures. They are not learned, he believed, but inherited. Ancient memories embedded in the psyche. And in this archetypal landscape, the moon occupies a powerful place. For Jung, the moon was a symbol of the unconscious itself. Just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, the unconscious reflects the light of the conscious mind. It is not its own source of illumination, but a mirror, glowing with borrowed light. Its phases echo the way thoughts and memories appear and disappear, sometimes hidden, sometimes revealed. In this way, the moon becomes a living metaphor for the hidden parts of the self. The connection to madness fits naturally here. To descend into madness, in Jungian terms, is often to be overwhelmed by the unconscious. Dreams, shadows, and impulses rise too strongly, eclipsing reason. The moon's phases, bright, dark, waxing, waning, mirror this rhythm of stability and collapse, of balance lost and regained. It is no wonder that cultures projected instability onto the moon. In the depths of psyche, it seemed to embody the same shifting tides. Dreams under the moon carry special weight in Jung's vision. They are not random, but messages from the unconscious, speaking in symbols. A dream of moonlight might point to the hidden feminine, the intuitive, the cyclical. A dream of eclipse might suggest confrontation with shadow, or the fear of losing clarity. To be moonstruck, in this symbolic language, is not simply to lose reason, but to be caught in the pull of archetypal forces too vast to resist. The moon also carries the archetype of the feminine, Across mythologies, it has been tied to goddesses, mothers, and cycles of fertility. In Jungian psychology, this aligns with the anima, the feminine side of the psyche present in all individuals. Just as the moon softens the night, the anima softens consciousness, offering intuition and depth. But if neglected or resisted, it can overwhelm, leading to confusion or imbalance. Thus the moon, in its beauty and instability, reflects the duality of the anima itself, nurturing yet dangerous, inspiring yet unsettling. What is striking is that these archetypal meanings appear across cultures with no direct connection. Whether in Chinese poetry, African myth, or European folklore, the moon is repeatedly tied to change, to mystery, to madness. This is the essence of the collective unconscious. Images arising independently in distant places, yet carrying the same resonance. Humanity, it seems, has always looked at the moon and seen not only a celestial body, but a symbol of its own hidden depths. Even in modern art and psychology, the moon remains a guide into inner landscapes. Therapists might speak of moon phases as metaphors for emotional cycles. Writers describe depression as a dark moon, renewal as a waxing crescent, revelation as a full moon of clarity. These metaphors are more than poetic flourishes. They are echoes of archetypes, old patterns rising again in new forms. And so, when we ask why the moon has been linked to madness, Jung's perspective gives us a deeper answer. It is not just that moonlight disrupts sleep, or that gravity tugs at tides, or that folklore warns of witches. It is that the moon has always stood as a symbol of the unconscious, vast, shifting, luminous, and sometimes overwhelming. To lose reason under the moon is, in this sense, to be drawn into the deepest parts of oneself. From here, the path of our journey leads toward reflection. If the moon mirrors the unconscious, then perhaps it is also a mirror of humanity itself. Its face, scarred and shining, reflects not only sunlight, but our fears, our hopes, our endless cycles of shadow and light. When we gaze at the moon, what we see is never only the moon itself. We see a reflection of sunlight, yes, but also of ourselves. The moon has always acted as a mirror, catching the light of the sun and sending it back to us in gentler form. But it also catches the light of our imagination, reflecting our fears, our desires, and our inner turmoil. To understand the link between the moon and madness, it helps to see it less as a cause and more as a canvas, one onto which we have projected the shifting shadows of the mind. The surface of the moon has long been read like a face. In Western traditions, people have spoken of the man in the moon, seeing eyes and a mouth in its dark patches and bright plains. In China and Japan, many see the figure of a rabbit, pounding rice cakes or medicine with a pestle. These patterns are accidents of geology, but to the human mind they become stories, symbols, companions. The moon does not speak, but we give it a voice. It does not smile, but we imagine its moods. Like a mirror, it reflects not only what is there, but what we bring to it. This habit of projection explains much of its connection to madness. When people felt restless or agitated, they looked up and saw the full moon shining unusually bright. Its face seemed watchful, intrusive, unsettling. They concluded that the disturbance had come from above, when in fact it was their own minds at work. The moon was a convenient mirror, capturing the instability within and returning it as if it were external. In this way, the moon became a symbol not of the cause of madness, but of its image. Artists have long played with this mirroring quality. In literature, A character who stares at the moon too long is often one who loses touch with reality. The gaze outward becomes a gaze inward, exposing thoughts that are fragile, obsessive, or unstable. The moon is not the agent of their madness. It is the stage on which it becomes visible. Its pale glow illuminates not only landscapes, but psyches. Psychology reinforces this view. Jung described the moon as a symbol of the unconscious, reflecting the conscious mind back in distorted, dreamlike form. Just as a mirror can show us our face reversed, the moon can show us our inner world in ways that feel both familiar and strange. To project onto it is to see ourselves, but slanted, colored by shadow. This slant can be inspiring, the spark of poetry, romance, or vision. But it can also be destabilizing, leaving us unmoored. The moon's phases deepen this metaphor. A crescent may remind us of beginnings, of slivers of possibility. A full moon can suggest clarity, fullness, intensity. A waning moon can feel like decline, endings, loss. These are not properties of the moon itself, but of the meanings we assign. Each phase becomes a reflection of cycles within us. Cycles of mood, of energy, of stability, and collapse. The moon mirrors our temporariness, reminding us that nothing, not even sanity, is fixed forever. And so the link between the moon and madness may not rest on physical influence at all. It may rest on the simple fact that the moon is a perfect mirror for instability. It changes constantly. It appears and disappears. It is sometimes hidden, sometimes blindingly bright. In its restless nature, we recognize our own. To stand beneath the moon, then, is to stand before a mirror of the psyche. What we see depends on what we bring. Lovers see intimacy. Poets see inspiration. Villagers in turmoil see disorder. Judges and doctors once saw lunacy. The moon itself remains silent, but it reflects endlessly, carrying our projections back to us in silver light. From here, our journey moves toward one final theme, the cycle itself. If the moon is a mirror, it is also a clock, a constant reminder that time moves not in straight lines, but in circles. And this circular rhythm, waxing and waning, has shaped not only our calendars, but our sense of the human mind. To close our exploration, we turn now to the moon as cycle, a symbol of the repetition of light and shadow, sanity and madness, that defines the human experience. The moon has always reminded us that life moves in circles. Night follows day, seasons turn, and the moon waxes and wanes with steady rhythm. For our ancestors, who had no artificial light, no clocks, and no calendars beyond what the sky provided, the moon's cycle was one of the clearest signs of time passing. It became not only a calendar but a symbol, proof that life itself is cyclical. And when people thought about madness, they often described it in the same terms. Madness, they believed, was not always constant. It came and went like phases of the moon. A person might be calm and reasonable at one time, only to slip into confusion or frenzy when the moon grew full. Then, as the light waned, their mind seemed to return to balance. Just as no phase of the moon lasted forever, no state of mind was permanent. The cycle of lunacy was seen as a mirror of the lunar cycle. This perspective found its way into medicine. In earlier centuries, physicians distinguished between those who were insane, permanently disturbed, and those who were lunatics, whose instability was thought to follow the phases of the moon. Madness was not only a personal misfortune, it was part of a larger cosmic rhythm. People imagined that just as the tides rose and fell, so did human reason, pulled along by an invisible thread tying mind to sky. Cycles also carried meaning in mythology. Lunar deities were often associated with life, death, and rebirth. The moon disappeared, then returned. It died in shadow, then was reborn in light. These rhythms inspired stories of resurrection, transformation, and eternal return. To be touched by lunar madness, then, was to be caught in one of these cycles, to die, in a sense, to reason, and then to be reborn into clarity. It was frightening, but also familiar, a reflection of the patterns of nature itself. Even outside the realm of superstition, we still think in cycles when we describe the mind. We speak of phases of depression, of moods that wax and wane. We describe anxiety as something that ebbs and flows, or creativity as something that comes in bursts like tides. These metaphors are not accidents. They are echoes of a worldview shaped by the moon, by the constant reminder that stability is not a straight line, but a curve that bends back on itself again and again. For many people, this cyclical understanding of madness provided comfort. It suggested that suffering would not last forever, that clarity would eventually return. Just as the dark moon always gave way to crescent light, so too might the troubled mind eventually find peace again. The very rhythm of the heavens offered reassurance, even when life on earth felt unpredictable. But cycles also carried dread. If clarity returned, so too did madness. No recovery was final, no stability permanent. The moon's cycle was endless, and so, it seemed, were the cycles of the mind. To live under the moon was to live in awareness that what was calm today might be turbulent tomorrow, and that order itself was always temporary. This paradox, comfort and dread woven together, lies at the heart of the moon's association with madness. It is not only about cause and effect, not only about light disturbing sleep or gravity pulling at tides. It is about rhythm. The moon taught us that life repeats, that nothing is fixed, that change is the only constant. In that rhythm, people found both meaning and fear. Today, even with science explaining so much, we still feel the pull of cycles. We still watch the moon rise and fall, and we still measure our lives against its phases, whether consciously or not. And perhaps that is why the old beliefs endure. Madness, after all, still feels cyclical. We still describe our minds in lunar terms. The metaphor remains alive because the experience remains true. As our journey nears its close, we return to where we began. The quiet glow of the moon above us, and the question of why it has been so deeply linked with madness. The final step is not to find a simple answer, but to rest in the mystery, to see the moon as both mirror and guide, both cause and symbol. In the closing reflection, we will gather the threads of story, science, and symbol, and let them settle into silence. And so, after wandering through myths and medicine, folklore and science, art and psychology, we return to the moon itself. Quiet, pale, steady in its orbit, it has hung above us for longer than memory. We have called it goddess, guide, trickster, and threat. We have blamed it for madness, praised it for love, and trusted it as a keeper of time. Yet through all these names and meanings, the moon has never changed. It is we who have shifted, projecting onto its face the shifting patterns of our own minds. The link between the moon and madness is not one thing, but many. It is the restless sleep disturbed by brightness. It is the echo of wolves and owls calling through the night. It is the cycle of fertility, of phases, of beginnings and endings. It is the ancient fear of what we cannot control, and the ancient hope that even in darkness, light will return. It is the archetype of the unconscious, reminding us that much of who we are lies hidden, only partially illuminated. Perhaps this is why the belief endures, even in a world of satellites and spaceflight. We know that the moon cannot pull at our brains as it pulls at oceans. We know that crime statistics and hospital records do not confirm the old suspicions. And yet, when the full moon rises, many of us still feel something stir. We notice the night differently. We expect strangeness. We remember stories. The power of the moon is not only physical, it is symbolic, psychological, cultural. Its influence is as much about meaning as it is about light. The astronauts who walked on its dust did not banish its mystery. They deepened it. Standing on its surface, they saw the Earth as fragile and luminous, a blue pearl in black space. In that moment, the moon was not just rock, but vantage point, a mirror that showed us ourselves. In this way, the old belief in lunar madness is transformed. The moon does not make us mad. It makes us aware. It makes us dream. It makes us see that we are part of rhythms larger than ourselves. As we close our exploration, imagine again that silver glow above. It does not demand belief nor proof. It simply shines, steady and serene, a witness to every joy and sorrow, every war and peace, every restless night and tender dream. To look at it is to remember that we are both small and vast, both fragile and enduring, both shadowed and illuminated. So why is the moon linked to madness? Because the moon is linked to us, to our cycles, our stories, our symbols, our restless desire to make meaning of the night. It is not the cause of our madness, but the mirror of it, a pale face in the sky reflecting the mystery of the mind. And with that thought, let the moon's glow fade gently into the background of your awareness. Let the tides of your own thoughts settle. The cycles of your own mind find their quiet rhythm. The night sky is wide, and the moon, whether full or hidden, will always return. As you drift into sleep, may its light not disturb you, but comfort you. May it remind you that madness and serenity, shadow and light, are all part of the same cycle, and that within that cycle rest is always possible.